Hey everyone, it's Friday evening again, and it's time for another episode of Cinema Crusaders. So, this week we're going to be talking about a movie from 1979, Disney Studios' The Black Hole. It's an interesting movie. It's definitely a product of its time. It had a lot of influences from other sci-fi that came before it or were contemporaries. But I think it had some influences on movies that came later as well, and I'm really looking forward to breaking it down with my co-hosts. So, speaking of those co-hosts, I'm going to introduce you to them now, and then we're going to get right into this movie. So, first, I want to introduce a writer, a creator, a filmmaker. He's got award-winning films from The Last Resort, Hunting for Fish, The Unmentionables, and he's working on some films right now that are going to be going to the film festival circuit. I'm talking about none other than the man behind Warehouse 9, Lance Lucero. How you doing, Lance?
Hey, doing good. Good to be here. This is going to be fun.
Awesome. Next, I want to introduce a fellow podcaster from the Sloppy Spoilers podcast. He's also a writer for Comic Crusaders and Omen Comics. He's got comics for not only Omen, but their imprint Revelation Comics. He's also an educator and a very good friend. I'd like to welcome none other than Steve Shadewing Sellers. How you doing, Steve?
Doing all right. Welcome to the Black Hole. This particular movie, I'm actually probably the one person out who has not seen it beforehand. So I'm coming in this with fresh eyes. So I think this will be interesting.
Awesome. And then I want to bring on, last but not least, the mouth from the South, that wonderful person who has all the information and great insights into all of the neat, juicy little tidbits that you want to know about these movies. He's also an artist and a creator, a writer into of himself. He does things for himself and also for ASAP Imagination as well. He's also one of my fellow podcasters from the Sloppy Spoiler podcast, none other than Jeff, Dr. Fate Bracey. How you doing, Jeff?
Hey, I'm good. Never the least at all. I'd also like to throw an extra little plug Lance's way because I recently picked up the 3 issues of Bob, the Non-Union Psychic, and I'm looking forward to digging into that. The art looks fantastic, so I can't wait to get into the story.
Thank you very much.
I can tell you, and I'm going to give a little free advertising here for ASAP and for Lance. Bob, Non-Union Psychic, and the Big Book of Bob are absolutely fantastic. The collected works in the hardcover with the ribbon, I might add. That's cool.
Ribbon, yeah.
It is just the coolest title I can think of.
Yeah.
Great to have a bookmark.
Yeah, it is absolutely classic. But Bob is great fun. Yeah, Psychic Detective. I think if I had to describe it, I want to see if Lance. When I read it, to me, it's Dirk Gently in hairdresser form. So Dirk Gently, holistic detective who has psychic powers and is a hairdresser. You know, that's the way I look at it. And I think it's great fun and cool. So.
All right. Thank you much.
All right. So now that we've gotten free plugs to ASAP Imagination, you can send me my check, Paul Hayden. Let's get into The Black Hole. So The Black Hole is a movie that came out in 1979 from Disney Studios. I think this is in that transition period of Disney Studios where they're going from family fare, you know, and they still had some really cool movies back then, but it had a different theme where they were trying to transition to more mainstream movies. And obviously, I think with this movie, they were trying to take advantage of the sci-fi craze that was sweeping the nation. We'd had Star Wars, we had Battlestar Galactica, we had 2001 Space Odyssey, Alien would come out, I think, this same year. I mean, it was just what was in vogue. And so Disney threw their hat in the ring with The Black Hole. To quickly sum up the plot, and we're going to talk about the plot a little bit because I think we need to talk about the story and where it goes right, where it goes wrong. But to briefly sum it up, the Palomino is a probe or an exploration ship looking for life on other planets. It's not really well explained, but that's their basic mission. And it has a crew of 5. Is that right? 5 humans and 1 robot.
Yeah, more or less.
Yep.
And another robot that joins them later.
Yeah, but the Palomino has a crew of 5 and 1 robot, and we'll get into Vincent later.
2 pilots, 2 scientists, and 1 reporter.
Yeah. And Vincent is voiced by Roddy McDowall, and we're definitely going to talk about him. But they are on this mission, and they come upon a huge black hole, and lo and behold, in the middle of this black hole is a ship, thought lost for a long time, the USS Cygnus, that is sitting there floating. It's not moving in the black hole. Long story short, they come to find out that the commander, Dr. Reinhardt, is off his gourd, basically, and plans to go through the black hole with the ship. But he's a genius as well as being a crazy and probably what would you say, a sociopath? I don't think it's a psychopath, but he's a sociopath.
Classic
Megalomaniac, I would say at least.
Yeah. And we get a real fun little, adventure story mixed in there with some really lofty sci-fi and metaphysical concepts that the story brings in. And I'm sure we're going to get into those. So real quick, I want to go around the horn. I'm going to start with Steve because he just saw it for the first time. And then I'm going to hit Jeff and then Lance to finish this part up. Talk a little bit about your impressions of the story. You can go wherever you want to go with it, stuff you like, stuff you didn't like. Go to Steve first.
Okay, I will say that I'm going to start on with the negatives because ultimately I turned around on this film watching it in the middle of it. Because when I saw it for the first time, at least in the early minutes of it, I had a hard time figuring out who anybody was or what they were about, who these characters were supposed to be, aside from actors that I recognized. So I recognize Anthony Perkins. I mean, you can't not recognize Norman Bates. You can't not recognize Ernest Borgnine. Virtually everybody else was just like, okay, these characters exist and they do things. And the robot. The robot Vincent ended up being easily my favorite character in the movie. And I would say now he is up there with like my favorite robots of all time. That is how much this changed. But eventually, after a while, I started realizing, okay, I understand who these characters are and the roles on the ship. I understand what they're trying to do. I understand who the villain is. The villain I felt was really, really well done, except for certain elements, which we'll get into. But I would say the general concept of him I really, really liked. I thought Maximilian Schell did a great job with him, and I thought that the henchman robot was very good. So you have these elements. You have elements where you can definitely tell they're exploring philosophical concepts. Through it, they're doing Paradise Lost type of stuff in space. There are definite influences on Event Horizon. We talked about this earlier, but my first thought, like almost immediately on seeing the Cygnus, was okay. They look like they're aiming for something like Event Horizon was, and it turns out that's kind of not too far from the mark. And I kind of felt like, okay, you can see where the people who created Event Horizon might have been influenced by this. So I kind of dug that. But you can sort of tell that they were taking like little pieces of like Buck Rogers type of action and, things that were very space opera with a little bit of the Star Trek concept and, the whole idea of going through the black hole in the way that we saw with 2001 at the very end going into the monolith. All these little bits and pieces that kind of came together, but it becomes its own thing. And I always find that very interesting where you kind of take a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and then it somehow evolves to being its own sci-fi film. And I feel like that's what we got here. And so I came towards the end having an appreciation for it because I ended up liking some of the characters. I ended up liking the concept a lot. I like the ideas they were aiming for. It's just that there are times when the execution does not work. And it really doesn't really make you like... but I would say you really don't feel like you get to know the human characters as well as you would like. But there's a lot of stuff that you want to know more about. And I feel I wish that, this thing had not fizzled out as much as it did, because I feel like if you explore some of these ideas, you could get a really cool series.
I think it was definitely a slow burn movie a lot of the time. I think that I forgot about Buck Rogers, which was a huge TV show at the time on TV,
right,
starring Gil Gerard. And I loved that as a kid. I watched it all the time. And the other thing is, I will say that besides Anthony Perkins and Ernest Borgnine, for me, I immediately recognized the voiceovers for the robots of Roddy McDowell and Slim Pickens. Yeah. It gets just, you can't.
I just love the idea of a robot that sounds like with this deep Southern voice.
Yeah.
It's just great.
Well, not to mention the fact that now that I'm older, and at the time when I first saw it, I saw this movie in the theater when it came out, but now I've seen Blazing Saddles, and so immediately I hear that voice, and then I like flash back to Blazing Saddles and that
I
character.
think Doctor Strangelove.
Dr.
Yeah.
Strangelove, yeah.
I was waiting for old Bob though to ask somebody to sing the Camptown Ladies and then just cringe. I was just like, oh no. So
When Johnny comes marching home.
Yeah.
One kind of nice little touch about that is Roddy McDowall and Slim Pickens are not credited in the film, so
No,
it
they're
kind
not.
of makes the robots
no, they're not. Yeah.
robots.
It is interesting, and they're huge. I mean, Vincent's a huge part of the movie, and Roddy McDowall is not credited at all. I watched to see if he was, and he
Yeah,
wasn't.
Vincent was pretty much the hero of the movie.
Yeah, it's like you do a movie and you've got a creature or a thing in there that's not a human and it just says like Bigfoot as himself. That's the kind of feeling I got from that.
Definitely. So, your thoughts, wherever you want to go, good or bad, on the story itself. Let's go, Jeff, next.
Okay, I will admit right off the get-go, I am a mega fan of this film. I enjoyed it immensely as a child when I first saw it, and rewatching it again today, every time I rewatch it, I'm reminded of how much I really like this film for a vast variety of reasons. And given the years of separation, each time I get a new viewing in, I do find things in it that I somehow missed before, or maybe only just kind of subconsciously picked up on. Obviously, as a middle-aged man, I'm more sophisticated than I was when. How old was I then? Like 10 years old when I first saw the movie. So there's a lot there. Looking at it again now with a wiser and slightly refreshed eyes. I came across realizing that I like it for a whole new set of reasons. One of the things I like it for is, like Steve said, it is its own thing. Now, the film was initially not trying to bank on the Star Wars craze, believe it or not. It was trying to bank on the disaster movie, which was a very big thing in the mid-'70s.
Silent Adventure in Space, yeah.
Yes, this film had a long and troubled production just trying to get there. And, they were thinking like, well, we've flipped a boat, we've burned a building, we've crashed a jet. Let's do something out in space. Space is kind of becoming a thing. So it was supposed to be a bunch of people on a space station, and, there's a supernova or a solar flare hits it. And, you've got to escape, and it was going to be a lot more Disney-fied in the beginning. A lot of like families and kids and things on there, and we got to save all these. So a little Swiss Family Robinson, a lot of the kind of Disney tropes, and I'm very grateful for the fact that the director who finally ended up doing it just kept refusing each script. And this thing had a lot of writers rewriting and polishing and finishing it up, and they finally got to a very satisfyingly mature story. And I applaud Disney for taking a step in that direction, even though this movie only made its money back. It was not a financial success. It did break even for them. But, it led to us getting things that are a little bit more interesting, like Pirates of the Caribbean, and, Disney has diversified out into other companies. It was a big risky thing to have a PG-13 film, and they got a lot of hate for that. And matter of fact, the posters did not say Disney at all. It was released through Buena Vista, but when you watch the credits, it says a Disney production.
Right.
Now, what my overall impressions is I feel like this movie harkens back to a lot of the fanciful space movies that I enjoyed from the 50s specifically, while trying to get into that philosophical, intellectual space of Star Trek, and actually trying very hard most of the time not to be Star Wars. Now, you get into some Star Wars there because they were looking at toys and merchandising and things like that. So those elements are clearly there, but they kind of save all that for the finale, which was a proper place for it, I think. And I agree with Steve. The actors are just kind of like, you're just kind of put into the situation with them. It reminds me of a recent film, Underwater, which kind of starts in the middle of the action, and you have to get to know the characters along the way, which did receive a lot of criticism for that film because, when the first guy dies, you've got no attachment to him, really. You don't know a thing about him, and that's a valid thing. But I kind of like this approach, and it's not an approach that's taken often, where you you just like all of a sudden you're this fly on the wall and you're getting to know the people, and there's sort of an organic thing to that, because I appreciate the fact that they just kind of started ratcheting into the story and then they slow down once you hit the cygnus. So we get the idea that's behind things. Okay, you guys are the pilots, you're the scientists, you're the reporter, and we get to see the really cool robot, and so we sort of get in that thing. And this film, Steve, I think would have probably served itself better if it was like 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours, to really.
Yeah, I felt like it needed more.
Yeah, if to stretch out those sort of elements, get a lot of more character development, because in a traditional film of modern era, we would probably spend 10, 15 minutes getting to know each of the characters, building some empathy, building bonds with them. So then when we're in danger, we have that empathy there. But I think being a fan of films abroad as well as films in America, I find that like some of my favorite Italian directors, for instance, sacrifice plot for character. Other guys sacrifice style for story. In this case, I feel like they were more invested in the mystery of things, because when I look at this film, it's not just from Buck Rogers forward to it's definitely taking some stuff from 2001 and into like the 1950s kind of space movies, and I think the music reflects that. We had a backstage talk about like you guys didn't like the jaunty music. I feel like that's very apropos for where part of this story is coming from. And then we have the other part of the score, which is very sinister and just kind of drives this menacing mood, which is also very appropriate when you're dealing with the presumably most powerful force in the universe that we know of, this black holes that can crush suns and planets. But I also look at this film as the haunted house in space, and Event Horizon does owe a lot to it. You look at the Cygnus, and it is perfectly gothic. The idea to build this erector set around the initial concept just adds this beautiful lattice. It looks like a cathedral out there amongst the vista of space. And in point of fact, the Event Horizon in that film, interior elements were actually based off of Gothic cathedrals in the architecture. So there's this great connective tissue between the two, I think. So, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Keep going. I just had some.
So for me, like, there's so much here. It's haunted house in space. It's Captain Nemo in space. It's Dracula in space. Maximilian Schell has that kind of vibe. I feel like interfere and of their own will. Like he's going to suck the blood out of them at any moment. There's so many interesting things going on here, and the film is surprisingly religious for a sci-fi film. There's all kinds of references to God, biblical passages, things that go on. The framing of certain shots. At one point, Reinhardt has this chandelier behind his head, like this massive halo, and then of course the black hole is one time referred to as like looking into the eye of God. And so by the time you get to the end, and that is a major issue, they did not have an ending when they started this thing. They just kind of like, we're just kind of going for it. We're going totally metaphysical, and that's where the movie both fails in a lot of respects, but it also adds a lot of introspection. As I mentioned in the backstage, it's an ending that leaves you pondering, but it's an ending you'll never forget.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I definitely want to talk a little bit about the music when we get to, like our potpourri section, as it's going to be kind of called, I guess, at the end. But I'd like to talk about the ending as well. I will say that this was such a departure for Buena Vista / Disney. I mean, that's kind of like the worst kept secret in Hollywood, that they're the same thing. Because up to this point, their big forays into space or aliens was The Cat from Outer Space and Escape the Witch Mountain. So this is such a departure from that. It's not even funny. I'll also say, you're talking about the Cygnus. The miniature work on that is absolutely fantastic, and I think the original
12 feet long. They made two of them, one for cool shots and one to wreck. Yeah. And surprisingly, it's not made out of plastic because it's so heavy. They actually use brass tubing.
I could be wrong, but I think that the Cygnus miniature, the one that survived, is out here at Disneyland or something like that. So, but I can't. I'm recalling that, but I can't tell you why I'm recalling that. So don't take that as gospel, anyone. So, um, story. What do you like? What do you don't like? Lance.
Well, I mean, overall, it's kind of funny. I did see this in the movie theater as a kid, and already, my cinematic knowledge had already, been educated a little bit. Watching this film, I got to realize, how much, yeah, this is Disney's knockoff of all these films that we've already mentioned, even Forbidden Planet. You can see the correlations between all of it. So watching it all seemed very familiar to me, even as a kid. It was like, okay, these themes are very, very familiar. I recognize what's going on here. So I'm not going to say that necessarily sucked me out of the movie, but I think that they relied too much on the genres rather than their own storytelling, which I think, kind of they torpedoed their own ship by doing that. Because it's like, okay, it did turn out to be its own thing, of course. I mean, it is its own thing, but we get those typical already trite action sequences that we've already seen even on TV, and I think that's probably a result of Gary Nelson being a big TV director. So you can kind of see that transition wasn't very cinematic. It could have been more cinematic, but it did have a big scope television aspect to it. So to me, that was also kind of like, wow, it's like watching a made-for-TV movie in a sense. I knew it was a Disney movie way back then, but then after a while, knowing that they started the Disney pictures to do movies like The Black Hole, or starting with The Black Hole and getting into like Never Cry Wolf to try to say, okay, we'll get away from the kids' fare and let's try to get a little bit more sophistication in there. Now, the duality of the story, having these bright-eyed robots with these goofy voices, whether it's redneck or sophistication, mixed with the dark theme was just like, to me, was like a train hitting a wall. Although it's fun, but it just didn't fit. It didn't blend. There was just too many different kind of styles going on in this film until the very end, where it finally builds an identity. But you gotta get there. It's a slow burn. You gotta get through the trite action. You gotta get through the usual spectacle of let's just show the model ship over and over shots like they do, and that was in vogue at the time. The photography of it, building it. This is our ship now. We're going to do a lot of panning shots and moving shots over it, just like we did in Star Wars or on the Enterprise. It's like, okay, the familiarity was there, but I think what sets it aside is the casting. I mean, come on, you got Anthony Perkins, Ernest Borgnine, Maximilian Schell. I mean, Robert Forster was up and coming at the time, and to me, man, he was cool as the ship's captain. I thought this dude is cool. He didn't fit, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, typical captain guy that that needs to save the day. He was hard-nosed, he looked rough, and he got down to business. So that is one of the major things that sold me. I was like, hey, he's a cool cat. Their uniforms are cool. He's got the action flair and the leadership quality. He had charisma, like the rest of the cast did. But I did walk out even way back then in '79 scratching my head. It was like, well, what was that all about, really? They had these action sequences, the goofy robots, stormtrooper-like Darth Vader-looking robots that was kind of a knockoff. But yet they went to that whole, like, Paradise Lost, like Steve said. It was like, okay, I get that. I get that Dante Inferno thing. I'm like, all right, but that just came out of nowhere to me. It was like they didn't know what they wanted. They couldn't get there. So it's almost kind of a cheap way to end the movie, ambiguously. And I think they had no choice but to go there. And when they did, it was like, okay, that's a little off the wall. So it is memorable. A happy accident.
I think what you're saying is so on point, because it does feel like there's so many things thrown in here, and it feels like this movie is in at least 3 parts, if not more. And that's not to say that I don't like the movie, because I liked it as a kid. I still like it now. But you look at it, there's definitely critiques there. And I think your point about the robots is right on. I love Vincent. I love old Bob. But you contrast the character design of Vincent versus Maximilian. I mean, they're night and day. They're night and day, you know?
But there was,
I mean, and I guess that's when I say Disney-fied. That's why I felt it was Disney-fied, because Vincent looks like a Disney character. Got the big eyes. It just looks like a Disney character. He absolutely does.
made to sell toys.
Yeah, exactly.
Blatant marketing ploy.
Yeah. And then, but the other thing I will say, though, is that ending, and even as a young kid, I got it. But I mean, talk about a departure for a Disney movie. And I think this fits in best here. I mean, it was really weird. And I saw this movie when I was like 7, 8 years old. I was a Catholic altar boy at the time. Okay. And I'm looking at this going, first of all, this evil robot, Maximilian, who's dead, and Dr. Reinhardt, is dead, and they're in the black hole, and it looks like they're having some sort of sexual encounter. It's got sexual overtones to it in a Disney movie, of all things. Then the two of them merge, and they're on top of a hill ruling over hell, populated by the damned, which are all the former crew members that were turned into robots with the flaming wreck of the Cygnus in the black hole. That is a visual that you would not expect to see in a Disney movie. I mean, that is something out of Event Horizon, maybe 2001. I mean, Star Trek doesn't even go, that far, and definitely not Star Wars. I mean, that is some heavy imagery right there, like you're talking about Paradise Lost. So just so interesting. And yeah, for the Catholic schoolboy who was like full into, being devout Catholic, altar boy, this was like, whoa, what is going on here? So definitely interesting. Real quick before we go, I'm sure we might get back to it, but your take on the end of the movie, what did you get out of it? Because that's kind of what I got out of it, and then there's the heaven part. But for me, I don't know, maybe this is because I'm Catholic, the hell was more interesting. So I think that's a very Catholic thing to say. But, Lance, what did you get out of that last ending part? Because it felt like so out of place, but so in place at the same time.
I think, well, the is it really that ambiguous? I mean, we can say everybody didn't make it, and there's just the idea of some people transcend and other people didn't.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's food for thought. It's like, okay, did they really make it through? Could they have made it through? Was it all just a psychotic dream? Because the only person that really wanted to go in was Reinhardt. It's like, okay, not everybody else wasn't aboard this whole sham idea. But I can see the correlation of, okay, yeah, transcendence of the good and descendance of bad. And it's probably internal, as in the mindset. Using, Dante Inferno imagery, and then, of course, like a rebirth in a sense, like a 2001 for those that may have transcended. So even as a kid, it was kind of like, okay, maybe he went to hell and they went to heaven. I guess that's the end of the movie, because really, I don't think they can make it through a black hole. I don't buy it.
It's really trippy, and it's the last thing you expect. I probably should have interviewed my mom and dad before this to see what they were thinking, sitting there with their 8-year-old son as this, sexual encounter between the robot and Maximilian's show went on. So
it's a Disney picture. Hey, take your kids. It's going to be fun. That's what it was all about. And then I think when people started scratching their heads and shifting in their seats, when having to listen to all the metaphysical and religious references, and all the theoretical science, I think maybe that's where they thought the kids were being lost. So enter those goofy little robots to keep them entertained.
And I will say it did not go over my head. I didn't understand all the mechanics of what was going on, but I'd seen James Bond by that point, so I had a little bit of an idea that something was happening there. So
yeah.
Steve, the ending of what did you get from the ending of the movie?
Okay. I had some thoughts. Actually, the first time I saw it, I was like, "What the hell is this?" Um, and then I was kind of thinking, well, obviously it's 2001, with the sense that you're going into this, the black hole, and you're getting all this imagery from it. You're passing, you're transcending, to something else, higher state of being, etc., whatnot. But it seems like mixed with that, it's passing through hell to get to heaven, or at least back to earth. And I think a lot of it may be a case of, okay, why they went in there. Because for Reinhardt, it really was about ambition. It was about, I want to show the people back on Earth that, I was right all along, and look how smart I am. And I have this great idea and this grand vision, and everything is about me. And I think that, so what ends up happening? He ends up reigning in hell.
Right.
He and Maximilian end up reigning in hell. And
John
what
Milton,
did he? Yeah,
John Milton is loving it right now. So.
yeah. It's John Milton and it's Dante, as Lance mentioned. I was the first time I saw it, I think I did get the idea that there was a bit of Dante's Inferno involved. But when it comes to the crew, they don't really want any of that. They don't even want to go in there. They're basically, it's a fool's hope. They're going in there with a hope that maybe they'll come out of it. So you could look at it, assuming they did come out of it, as saying, okay, they're placing their faith in God, rather than in themselves. And, they're rewarded for it because they don't really want to know more than is allotted to them. They don't want to look in the ark. They just want to get out, with the people that they love, in one piece. And so you could look at it as in the sense of faith being validated, if you want to look at that, or at that way. Or you can look at it in the sense that, okay, this is a delusion. This is like, time, condensing, to a crawl, as the people get, ripped up by the gravitational forces tearing them apart. You could certainly look at it, that way, as well. This is like the last images that they get as they die. Because clearly, scientifically speaking, they would be totally destroyed by this.
Yeah.
But it's possible that, maybe the way Reinhardt designed the ship, maybe they could have gotten through there. It's certainly, possible. He seemed to believe it. He seemed to, be smart enough that, he might have had, reason to believe that. And so you could say that maybe they went in there and they hit a wormhole, somehow in there, and then they just materialize somewhere else in the galaxy, and they have to find out where they are.
Well, it's
It's
interesting you say they hit a wormhole, because there is a line in there where Dr. Reinhardt talks about having to account for the possibility of an Einstein-Rosenberg bridge in the black hole.
Right. I was thinking that too. So that's a wormhole. So, it's certainly possible that they might have hit one and come out and they got lucky. In either case, it is definitely a statement on faith either way, faith either being validated or rejected. So what are you choosing? Do you want to serve in heaven or reign in hell? That's the choice. And, you could see the options of that as playing out for each side.
I'm going to get back to that when we wrap up the segment, but I want to hear Jeff's comments before I say what I was going to say. So, Jeff, on the ending of the film, what did you take away from that?
All right, so let me preface my thoughts on the ending film by giving you guys a little insight into how it was going. They did the script, they had everything but the ending, and they decided to shoot anyway. Now, you would think this is not the wisest thing to do, but you'd be surprised how often this happens, and even still happens in films today. Multi-million-dollar projects that, we'll write it as we go. We'll figure it out. Surely by the time we get to the end of the film, we'll have it figured out. And in fact, they even shot this film chronologically to give themselves a better chance of doing that. Didn't work out that way. As a matter of fact, they had to call the actors in for some reshoots for the final scenes there because they still hadn't come up with an ending. They did shoot an ending that wasn't satisfactory. If you remember, when they focus on Kate as they're spinning around, you zoom into her eye, that was actually supposed to transition back out to her face, and it's fading, and it's pulling back, and it's pulling back, and then you see these two fingers, and all of a sudden you find out she is one of the background angels in the Sistine Chapel. They literally went to Italy and film the Sistine Chapel. They got permission, from the Vatican to do
Wow.
all this. And they spent like $15,000 or $1,500, something crazy, and went out there and did all this, and then didn't even use that footage. So they were really flying by the seat of their pants, and it got to a point where like, okay, we've got to do something. So this is what they ended up with, and they kind of said like, well, we'll just count 2001 it, and we'll do a little something else here. So this is my take, given all of that. So Maximilian is adrift in space. We know that will be crushed. He has no MacGuffin magical gravitational field to keep him from being spaghettified as he hits the accretion disk. Reinhardt is surely dead. His ship is being pulled apart. So Reinhardt and Maximilian, and we'll probably get into this if we discuss character. The weird relationship they have. I think this all ties in. I feel like when it comes to Reinhardt and Maximilian, it's very much Yoda and the tree that's attached to the dark side. You take in there, what you find in there is what you take with you. And Reinhardt was full of murder and ambition and arrogance and narcissism. And there is a very clear religiosity to the film. Reinhardt, in a lot of ways, is Captain Ahab, and the black hole is his white whale, this thing that he is obsessed with conquering at the cost of everyone else. Because, like Ahab, he sacrifices his own crew to achieve his own obsessive ends. And it completely fails on him. So I think that he obviously expired when the ship pulls apart. You can't survive in space. Maximilian's crushed, and we don't know exactly how this being a rip in space and time, and therefore reality and dimension, we have to kind of assume that there's some sort of cosmic payoff here, that he has merged with his creation, which in a lot of ways has sort of supplanted him, and now he is trapped within this this body that lacks all of the passions and feelings and everything that a human has. He's trapped in this cold metal shell because he's been just that dispassionate when it comes to the lives of others. And I don't see Maximilian Reinhardt as ruling over this hellscape that they find themselves in. Maximilian is not floating. He is grounded on top of this peak, and his arms are raised up in this agonized pose, a pose we've never seen Maximilian's arms do. He always keeps them locked into place, this Swiss Army knives of death, if you will, at his sides here. So this is a very expressive pose for a robot that did very little to express himself other than with pure aggression. And with Reinhardt's eyes peering out in this wild sort of madness, he's not Lumiere. His eyes are darting side to side. That seems to be a fear or panic response to me. And I also noticed as we were looking at the Cygnus burning down, I tried to pay attention to the cloaked figures, which seem to represent the crew. They're all facing away from him. Once you get the ones in the extreme foreground, they all have their backs turned to him, as if in a way now he is their prisoner, whereas they have been his. And that's my final takeaway on that.
Okay.
As for the other, we get the crazy glass corridor. We get what appears to be some sort of angel, some sort of transcendent guiding spirit, because they come through on the other side. And what do they encounter? They encounter what appears to be a planet with a sun, cresting as if the sun is rising on the planet. And they've gone from the darkness, and now they're about to step into the light, into a new world and a new experience. So my takeaway is that Reinhardt's technology did work, but there was more at play than simple science, that without the guidance of some other force, they would not have made it. And now they have the chance to explore this brave new world.
They could have been dropped off on Earth for all we know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I will say this as we wrap this up, and this segment took longer than I thought, but I think it was a great discussion, is that it's very interesting that the end of this movie is so open to interpretation.
Mhm.
You know, you it can mean so many things to so many different people. I'm tempted to say it's almost like a guy who does this on purpose all the time, sometimes infuriatingly so, Christopher Nolan, who does all sorts of movies that leaves the endings up into interpretation. But you know, this one definitely, I'd say 4 different people had 4 different takes on the end of the movie. And before we came on screen, I asked on the stream, I asked, do you think that they made it through the black hole? If you know that the Cygnus would have made it through, all things being equal, you know, if there hadn't been a crash and an accident and everything, even that is up for interpretation. So I think that's very interesting, and I think that's one of the intriguing things about this film. You know, in a good way. I'm not going to give the writers credit and say that they did this on purpose. And it sounds like they didn't,
Right.
but it does bring those questions to the fore.
And speaking of the Cygnus, you mind if I add in 2 little Easter eggs?
Sure.
One of the many names for this script, before they finally obviously settled on the black hole, when they decided they were going to put a black hole in it, was Space Probe 1. When they were trying to identify the ship, they classify that as Space Probe 1, or Space Station 1, Space Probe 1. And they say, like, Cygnus, you know, it's kind of like, oh, you know, Constitution class, Enterprise, that sort of thing. So that was a cool little thing. And the name Cygnus comes from the star cluster where we first discovered a black hole.
Huh.
Mhm.
That's cool. I like that little Easter egg a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, this took a little longer. So I don't want to not talk about the characters though, but for the sake of time, because I do want to talk about some of the things at the end, I want to go around the horn. I'm going to start with Jeff and then Lance and then Steve. And then I'll go last. Talk about one character that really stood out for you. One character or one acting performance, I guess, in the movie, or, you know, a combination of the two that stood out for you the most.
Oh, man. Okay. My initial, because everybody was so doggone good. Everybody in this cast is so good. I kind of want to go into Vincent just because, you know, when you've got nothing but your voice to use, you've got to be a really skilled professional to do that. But I'm going to give somebody else a chance to play around with Vincent, because I think everybody agrees he's our favorite character. You know, Vincent's is just top notch, best robot of all time in my book. I'm going to go with Maximilian Schell as Hans Reinhardt, because watching this again, I picked up on nuances. You know, I'm really studying the film because we're going to do the podcast. I'm not just watching it and enjoying it. I'm really studying it. And I find his performance is so interesting here. The way he is playing this game. He knows he has all the power in the situation, and yet he still needs his ego fed. You know, and he's got Anthony Perkins as his little sycophant fanboy, and he loves it. He loves it, even though he does it in a very restrained way. He's like, "Oh, doctor, you're a genius." He's like, "Do you think so?" And you know, and he's got this. Like I said, he comes across in a lot of ways to me as like a Dracula. He's got this menacing charm about him, and he answers your questions without answering your questions. Like, "Oh, you knew we were there. You said you were monitoring. Like, why didn't you say anything?" "Did I have to, Charlie?" And like, so he never gives you that straight answer. You just and everything he says is obviously facetious. And yet the crew is trapped in this position where they know if we ever want to get off of here, we kind of got to play by this guy's rules. And watching him play this little game of cat and mouse with them, and I love the fact that he doesn't do the raving madman, that he does this kind of restrained madman. But you know, this guy has got tons of screws loose. You know, the way he's acting, the way when Robert Foster, you know, tells him, like, you know, make Maximilian back off, is like, and they turns it on a second, he's like, "This is my ship."
Mm-hmm.
And you know, even the captain has to, like, "Yeah, okay, it's your ship. You know, we're all kind of screwed here. You've got an army of robots and all this." And there's something in that, and it could also be the fact that he's been 20 years in isolation, and he can't help but kind of play this game with the crew. And it makes me want to see a prequel to this, because the story of how he took the ship and took the crew. And I feel like there's a story there that he might have played a similarly ruthlessly bloodthirsty game with the people who were trying to oppose him after he kills Kate's father, and they realize, oh crap, something's crazy here. That's a story I'd like to see Disney explore, because I just found this really intensely his presence there really intensely creepy and dominating, and yet at the same time just charming enough that it's that, what did Vincent say? Like welcome to my parlor, said the spider to the fly when he's inviting them to dinner. That really sets up Reinhardt's character right there. He is dangerous, and yet you're stuck with him until you can figure a way out of it. And he's not the madman who's just going to kill you outright, but he's going to play with you like a cat a little bit. And you got to hope that his madness is going to swing in a way that maybe he'll actually let you off the ship, because his ego demands that somebody witness his great achievement.
Yeah, and I will add that Vincent, his little witticisms are just great for the storytelling aspect. I think it's interesting, too, what you're saying about Roddy McDowall. I'm curious if anybody will cover him, because his voiceover work is so great, but then you also contrast that with some of the live action stuff he did. Specifically, he oftentimes would play that, in Twilight Zone, that character who was arrogant and paid for it with his arrogance.
Yeah.
But one of the ones that stands out the most for me is in Camelot, where he played Mordred. And it's really a surprising performance, playing this character who is witty, charming, and evil to the core, knows it and loves it. So
and you got to hand it to the effects guys for making a couple of robots with just eyes, very expressive with those voices as well.
Yeah. Lance, what one character or acting performances do you want to talk about, or stands out for you the most that you want to cover?
Well, I mean, when you look at a well-established Maximilian Schell and Ernest Borgnine and Anthony Perkins, I mean, you already have a gigantic catalog to reference. So, I mean, top-notch casting all around. But to me, the up-and-coming, Robert Forrester is what grabbed me. He just did not fit the prototype of being a ship's captain, but he pulled it off. Mm-hmm. I bought it. I bought that he can go toe-to-toe with a Maximilian Schell, and he did. I think he's. I was like, keep an eye on this guy. He's kind of renegade. He's not the usual model-esque action flair. He's a guy that's going to get it done, hard-nosed. So he's the guy that stood out to me, I think, in a good cast, an amazing cast, top-notch cast, but to see somebody new and fresh, and it's like, who is this guy? He's pretty cool. He's pretty tough. I like that. As a kid, I even remember saying, hey, this is pretty neat. Everybody has fun with Vincent. It's great. It's Roddy McDowall. And seeing movies, seeing Maximilian Schell play Hamlet, seeing him in Top Cappy, seeing him and I think he was even in Vampires maybe. But Robert Forrester, he's the guy that struck me. He was like, all right, this guy's going to be big. He's going to be cool. He just was, to me, he had the right attitude and charisma to help carry his crew, his character, and the story forward. And even though it turns out to be a race to survival in the end, I think he did the best job of holding the hand to get everybody there. I think he did a really good job. I think he rounded out the cast. He just rounded out that amazing cast.
Just real quick before I go to Steve on Greg's last comment there, I'm usually not for remakes. I don't think most of us here are. I think this is one movie that would probably be could do well with a remake, with polishing up the screenplay and with some modern effects thrown in.
Get a Denis Villeneuve on it.
Yeah, and get a good cast. But the problem I see is that they would change the story too much and make it fit too much modern sensibilities, and I think then you would ruin all the good stuff you had here. So, so Steve, one character / performance that really stood out that you'd love to talk about?
Yeah, it's kind of hard not to mention Vincent. That guy, he was easily the hero of the movie, honestly. I just feel like the character, and and the thing is, you don't really expect that early on. You see, okay, yeah, he's the robotic sidekick. He's got an interesting personality. You kind of love how he's very cultured, and he has all of these little quotes for everything, and he's definitely has his deep memory banks, and he's able to do all these things, and he's handy. He's very communicative, and Roddy McDowall is always one of those guys who's entertaining. And I would say for a role like this, he's definitely the right guy, because he was also in Planet of the Apes as one of the apes. So, if anybody knows how to do a lot of really good voice work and to work, without physically performing, it's that guy. And on top of that, I will also say, in addition, we have seen his range as well. I'm also reminded of an episode of Night Gallery he did, one of the very early ones. And the character he played was just a scumbag. Absolute scumbag. Huh?
The one with the painting?
Yeah, the one with the paintings.
Yes.
Yeah. He was so good in that. And so you see that this is a guy who can, who has a lot of range, who can, do a lot of different kinds of roles, a lot of different kinds of movies, and he can be convincing in every single one, because he does have that charisma and he does have that charm, and he is very, very good at playing with voice work, and he's experienced at it. And that comes through with Vincent. And but you begin to also to see that in terms of just the role itself, what Vincent brings to the table as a character, they've definitely set him up. They even gave him his own archenemy. I mean, Maximilian is set up from the beginning to be the dark mirror of Vincent from the start. And that final battle between him and Maximilian, it's climactic. He's the one with the emotional moment as he has to deal with Bob's destruction. And then, he is like, okay, I will avenge us for both of us. I will avenge you for the both of us. I will uphold the honor, of our model for both of us. And he has that character arc. It's really well done.
It didn't occur to me till just now, in you saying it, that Roddy McDowall as the robot has the most dramatic moment in the whole movie.
Yes.
Like when he's
That's what I was saying. By the end of it, it was like he's the hero of the movie, more so than Robert Forster, and I was impressed by that.
When he flies away from Bob's body and he turns to look back as he's flying away, man, that was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Oh, I was upset as a kid when Bob died, and I watched this movie last night.
I don't. He goes on about I don't like the company of other robots, and then and then his best friend is the other robot, and he mourns him and he honors them. I mean that's more that. I mean he has a character arc, clear character arc.
I will also say about Roddy McDowall. You brought up Planet of the Apes. I'm just throwing this out there, and I don't really know that we need to discuss it, but I think it's weird. It was weird to me watching the movie again. Planet of the Apes had the same dynamic. You're sending out a deep space probe that you have no idea when it's going to come back, and you have 3 men and 1 woman in Planet of the Apes. Yep. Here you have 4 men and 1 woman. There are some problems there, especially if they're not.
Yeah, there was. I actually was tempted to talk about Kate a little bit. I should have mentioned that. One of the interesting things about this universe, and it's never explained, is okay. You have these psychics, have the ability to ESP connect to a robot, and I'm like, how does this exactly work? Is it some kind of psychopathic ability where she can read the minds of machines somehow?
It's head or what?
Yeah.
Are they mutants? I mean, do they? How do they create these kinds of people? Why her? It's really, really interesting, though. I would have liked to have known more about that.
That's the character that's just left dangling. It's just
that's really a shame because the idea is great.
Right, and it is a shame because it's like, well, what can you really say other than they just sold it short?
In addition, that she's also has the most personal investment of any of the characters on the ship because she's in there to find her father. And her father was murdered by Shell. I mean, I'm sorry, by Shell. So I mean, completely wasted.
Yeah,
completely.
And I think your points are absolutely spot on there. The character that I want to talk about is the character of let's see, what is his name? Dr. Durant, played by Anthony Perkins. This character is so interesting to me. I mean, and what I get out of it now versus what I got out of it as a kid. I think I have more information now, but I had the same feelings about the character even as an 8-year-old. This character starts off, and right off the bat, you get this idea that there's something a little off with this character. He is more committed to science and scientific inquiry and discovery than he is to humanity. He hasn't quite lost the plot yet, because I don't think he's been presented with his ultimate tempter, in Reinhardt. But even then, you could see that he has this flaw in his character right from the very beginning.
He's the second character that has an arc.
Yeah,
he definitely makes that choice.
Yeah.
And for a Disney movie, that death is violent. It is violent. I remembered that as a kid.
Do you think? Do you think
he
he could end up being a Reinhardt light?
Well, here's the thing. This is where I was going to go with it. Is he meets Reinhardt, and as 8 years old, I hadn't read this yet. Watching this movie again several times since I've become an adult, I think that at least in part, Durant is Faust.
I thought you were going to go there.
He makes a Faustian bargain with Reinhardt. I could see him becoming an acolyte, but he would never be an equal. And I think Maximilian, in a way, takes out Reinhardt violently because he's jealous, or takes out Durant because he's jealous of Durant. Because
he was marked from the beginning. You can kind of see that.
It's interesting, the symbology of that death, because Alex defends himself with a book of knowledge, because that's all he has, and it doesn't save him.
No.
And there's the Faust part, is that what he sold his soul for was that book of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And it ends up being the thing he tries to hold up to save him from the devil, Mephistopheles, if you want to use that. Maximilian, Mephistopheles coming to get him. And Mephistopheles tears right through him and tears his heart out. It tears his soul out, literally. The weird part about this, though, is that he's somewhat redeemed by being the archetype, which is true, of the incredibly smart person who has no common sense whatsoever.
And also the fact that he sacrifices himself for Kate.
For Kate, yeah.
But first we have to get to why he has to sacrifice himself for Kate. When Kate reveals to him, they fill in Kate completely, Vincent does, on what's going on and who the crew is. You have had all of these signals pointing to you that Reinhardt is unstable and murderous and everything else. So what do you do but go over there and pull the face mask off one of these robots in front of God and everybody so they can see what you're doing? That is one of the stupidest things ever. But doesn't seem out of character, because I've known quite a lot of people.
Did you poke it?
Yeah. Did you make sure it's dead? Yeah.
Who are absolute geniuses who don't have any street sense. But then, like you said, he kind of redeems himself, because at that moment he realizes the folly of a mistake, tries to get Kate out of there, and ends up paying the price. So I think his character is so interesting, because he was headed down a very dark path, really, between him and Harry. And I would love to talk about Harry as well, because he turns out to be a character who's all talk, and then in the end is a weasel who causes all sorts of problems.
It was such a wonderful characterization too, because these characters are all very human in their flawed natures.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's such an interesting, because it's Faust redeemed. Faust, and he doesn't get to live with his redemption. He ends up having to die because of it. But such a cool story arc in a Disney movie. And like Lance said, he dies violently for his mistakes, So, and in a way, it does lead to the end, the final act of the movie. But then right after that, when, I'm just realizing when Durant gets killed, that's when Reinhardt asks Kate to save him from Maximilian. So it's almost like Durant or Reinhardt has realized now that Maximilian has this
if you
jealous
look,
attachment.
If you look at the movie, Reinhardt doesn't just ever command Maximilian, and Maximilian stops. When Maximilian wants to do something, Reinhardt has to raise his voice to him every time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a weird relationship, and it's never clear who's the master and who's the servant.
Yeah, the power dynamic was clearly shifting.
Yeah.
I really got the impression that in addition to all the other characters we've compared him to, he's also Dr. Frankenstein.
Yeah.
He created a monster that escapes his control.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
So,
there's another character that, is on a par with the devil
Yeah.
as well.
And so this is why, even though there are flaws in this movie, and we're about to get into the final section where I think we might hit on some of what we thought were, other flaws, there's such cool stuff here that could be polished. If it was polished well, it could just make an incredible film. Not to say that this film is not enjoyable in and of itself, So that said, let's get into our final segment that we're now going to. I'm officially dubbing it the potpourri segment now. Where
Potpourri.
we talk about various elements of the film that we want to cover, and I'm going to use host privilege here and go first. I'm going to talk a little bit about the music, and I am going to, if anybody wants to comment on this, Jeff, please feel free to do so. For me, this music is really a mixed bag. I think that music makes a film. It can make a good film great. It can make a bad film mediocre, and it can make a bad film horrible, depending on what the music is. I think that the opening title sequence sets the tone for the entire film, which is, we were talking about, spooky and mysterious. It opens up with the black hole, and it's got this haunting music going up and down chords as they give you this idea that the black hole is almost.
But the film actually starts with a black screen and the heroic overture before you get to the creepy music.
This is true. This is true. My problem with the heroic overture is not that the heroic overture is there. I expect it in the same way that I would expect the heroic music from John Williams in Star Wars. This is kind of my point. My point is that it was very. What's the word I'm looking for?
It's jarring to me because it's just like, that's not what the theme of the movie is, and then you have it just doesn't fit with the whole vibe.
Well, plus it feels more. I mean, the characters at that point are in a desperate fight to try and save their own lives. So I could see you giving us some exciting action music that gives us some heroic overtones when different characters do different heroic things. But instead, I felt like I was watching Colonel Bogey, the military march, complete with piccolos and high-end trombones and everything. It just felt like a parade march in the middle of this desperate action sequence.
There's definitely brass in there.
And that's why it felt off to me. If they had given me something more upbeat with moments of tenseness and moments of danger, followed with moments of heroic music in there when Vincent and Bob do their things, or when the captain and his first mate do things, it would have totally been fine. And I guess that's kind of where it really took me out of the feel of the story, because it didn't feel like it matched with the theme and what was going on screen. And not only that, I went back and watched it several times. I felt like they kind of skimped a little bit, because it felt like they used the same melody and just put it on loop. Like they kept looping the same 1.5, 2 minutes of music over and over again. So it's almost like they ran out of money to finish the score. I mean, that's what it feels like to me, and why I would love to talk to the director sometime or somebody involved with it and ask them that question.
Now, I do know from my side of production, there's a lot of things that they wanted to achieve. And this was the most money Disney had ever spent on a film ever at the time. And so that could be a possibility, because I know there's things they wanted to do as far as special effects and characters and things that they just couldn't do because the money was running short.
Okay. And I mean, John Barry's no slouch. I mean, he's good, and maybe it was his musical direction was just as aimless as the garbled story. If you say it's a Disney movie, give me music. Oh, okay. And then wait, no, it's a science fiction movie with dark. Oh, wait a second now. I can see a level of confusion even on a composer. It's like, well, what is this movie and what's it supposed to be? Yeah. So it does seem like overtures are reused in action sequences. It does seem like the music editing was skimped upon. Absolutely.
I think for me, the the music works because one, it's a throwback to the very heroic, very super pro American. We're going to explore space kind of movies and themes from just the
It's
prior.
very classic space opera.
But I think one of the reasons I also like it is because this guy had directed, if I'm not mistaken, Freaky Friday for Disney. He was not an action director, and I cannot believe what he was able to pull off, given this was his first film of this sort of nature. So the action is a bit lacking because everybody's basically, all the bad guys are basically stuck in a C-3PO kind of suit. They don't have a lot of mobility, so the score actually kind of pumps up the action, whereas like a more modern day action director would give us a more interesting visual scene. So the music kind of helps build that up a little bit, whereas the scenery itself can't do it.
I guess my only rebuttal to that would be, to me, I am contrasting this and the way that the music, I guess, is supposed to pair with the action versus, and the action in the scene I'm about to reference, there's a hell of a lot more of it. So I'm going to say that right off the bat, but consider the scene where Indiana Jones, where Indiana Jones is on the truck in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and you have the Raiders march, dun 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 dun. But then the moments where Indiana Jones is fighting the Nazis or hanging out the truck, it's that very heavy dum 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 dum.
I totally get it. Now I even give it your point. Like I would not have opened this film with the heroic overture, because that does conflict so much with the overall theme of the film, which is what we get when the credits start rolling and we see the digital black hole.
Yeah. So, I think it's an interesting point of discussion. I could see both sides, but yeah, that's kind of what I took away from it. And it was the most glaring thing. I was really surprised, but it was the thing that really stood out for me the most when I watched it again this week in preparation for the pod. So that said, I'm going to go next to Lance for what you want to talk about potpourri-wise for this movie.
I mean, overall, the production value is it's pretty good. And once again, I think it was a question of, a director not really knowing how to shoot an action or science fiction film. There are great moments, asteroids cruising down the middle of that ship and they got to run across the bridge, which is a great visual. Mm-hmm. But then there's stagnant robots on a bridge that have no movement whatsoever. They're just bowling ball pins,
And real quick, if I could interrupt you, Disney, up until the point they bought Marvel and Star Wars, still featured that in its theme parks as like an example of their science fiction shots that they love to brag about, which says a lot, so.
Right. And having said that, even for a time where blue screen was decently perfected, it was horrible in this movie. I mean, when they're standing in front of the window and you can't distinguish between the hair and the background, it's like, I'm doing that right now and a better job of it. And they had millions of dollars, and it's like, what, didn't they like that screen? Or was it a black window and they decided to put an animation behind it and they couldn't separate? I mean, this is Walt Disney. That always confused me how poorly the blue screen was in this movie, and they wrote the book on animation. I mean, there's some top-notch animation in this movie with the so-called digital 3D effects they were looking at in their ship. That's some great animation, contrasted with the asteroid cruising down, rolling down the middle of the ship. And then you have these great actors that are giving you them all in front of bad blue screen, and it just sucks you out. It's just like, what is going on? That looks terrible. That is where I think Disney came up really short. That reshoot those scenes, do something, because that shouldn't even have made final cut. It was so poorly rendered.
I might be able to shed a little light on that.
Real quick before you do that, even the final scene has a big problem because you have the probe ship going towards the Earth. If you watch it, I noticed this. You've got the matte, the background of the Earth, and then the ship is bouncing around all over the place. So it's like
a little jittery.
Yeah, it's not matched up. It's not synced at all. So the ship doesn't look like it's moving realistically at all.
Right, and you look at movies that were being made the exact same time. Alien. You look at Flash Gordon. I mean, you look at Star Trek the movie. I mean, visually far superior than the black hole. But the reason why I say that is just because there are those glaring moments where they completely miss the mark, and it was like, well, that's as good as we're going to get. Let's just shove it out there and see what happens. So I think the studio sold the movie short. They could have did a lot better production value on this. There were several times where you can see the wires on the robots and Maximilian. It's like, come on, guys, you could have did better than that. I think overall, that's why I keep saying this Gary Nelson's transition from TV to cinema didn't work well. And I can see that he was the wrong guy for the job. With such a great cast and everything else, they should have had a better director. I hate to say it, and there it is.
They had several people come in, bow out for various reasons. So, he was not the first choice.
I wouldn't think he would be, but I think they defaulted to a Disney guy.
Yeah.
It's just like, this guy's reliable, he'll show up every day on time and do his job. Let's just get him. And that's that. He has his place in Disney history, even so with a black hole, but stylistically, I think he missed the mark on this movie, 100%.
Jeff's cat was so upset with the production value there, he mooned us just now. Or she mooned us. I don't know.
In fairness to them at that point, Disney was inventing a lot of things in house at the time, because it's not like today where you farm out, 6 different companies for your special effects and things. Lucas kept all of his stuff secret. He wasn't exactly eager to share his computer controlled camera technology. So Disney, who was not used to making this sort of production, they sort of had to invent all of this stuff for themselves for this production and a high rate of speed. So
to me, if you look back at 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which was like the Star Wars of the 50s, and they pulled it off, and you can't do it with the black hole, there's something wrong there. Innovation is what Disney's about.
Yeah.
But I will also say this.
Animals.
I think we have to remember at the time that this was at the time when Disney they weren't in danger of going under, but they're not the Disney we have now. They hadn't had a hit movie in years. Their biggest hit movies were things like the Apple Dumpling Gang, which didn't, things like that. Nothing against the Apple Dumpling Gang. I enjoy that movie, but, not groundbreaking cinema either.
Yeah.
So stuff like that, or the North Avenue Irregulars. I mean, this is what they were doing. They were pumping out these types of movies, and it wasn't getting them a lot of traction. And it was becoming, oh my gosh, this is going to be a surprise. Disney was doing formulaic movies, so, audiences were tired of seeing the same old formula, so they were having a big problem at this point. So next I'm going to go, Steve, I'm going to finish up with you. So I'm going to go to Jeff next for Potpourri.
All right. Potpourri, I want to talk about the special effects a little bit and science fiction versus science fact. I think a lot of the effects, given all the problems they had, the budget, the new director, and trying to invent a lot of new technology, were pretty darn sweet for the most part. The big beautiful shot of the meteor that crashes in the ship and it's rolling down that corridor. That meteor is 4 feet wide. It's made out of fiberglass and it's lit internally, and it's being wheeled down this massive corridor that they made to do that composite shot. Yeah, so you can tell when they were really putting their money into something. You're like, all right, this is a money shot. Let's make it worth it. And then, like Lance says, when you see the blue halos around somebody, whenever there's space behind them, you're like, come on, guys. I can see why that's definitely annoying. I think it might have been a smart thing to do to make some very restrictive C3PO style outfits, because then you didn't have to get on board with action, and they actually hired mimes to perform as the robot soldiers, which played to their strengths on that. I love Vincent and old Bob. It's amazing how, something that doesn't even have a mouth and just the attitude of the eyes. And I love old Bob's panicky little shivers. Just how
He looks so beat up too.
yeah, and just so absolutely expressive they managed to make these things with just the most minimalistic of features. And they had several different Vincents for doing different things, and just the amount of menace they were able to get out of Maximilian, a creature that doesn't even talk in the film, but just clever little bits of puppetry, like just rotating his head at just the right time, having him gimbal right into place, and even like the little trying to one-upmanship on Vincent, where he twists upside down. And as a kid, I loved all those effects, even the times when I could see the wires, because I know wires are hard to do even back then. Although I will say, wire work, here's something really clever they did for the astronaut scenes when they were dealing with zero G. They would actually they were upside down, and they would lower them into a scene where it looks to us like they're coming up through the floor to actually hide the wires, and that was really, really clever. I had to thought.
I also have to say, give credit to even then older Ernest Borgnine doing those stunts. So.
Yeah, the actors complained. They said the harnesses were a nightmare, but you couldn't deny how cool the shots were.
Yeah,
and they wanted to go so far as to fly on the Vomit Comet that NASA uses to train astronauts, but they didn't have civilian access to that back then. Unlike Ron Howard would get to use later. So there's just a lot of cool things they do, both simple effects and cool effects, like their meteors. They basically just drop them out of camera when you see them flying at the Cygnus. And I love all that kind of model work. I kind of lament the days of like really cool models. I know it's all CGI and you can do so much more, but I kind of miss those tangible elements in movies a lot of the time. So I'm a big fan of anybody who does put in practical effects. But one thing that always irked me, even as a kid, because I was nerdy enough to know these things, and it was crazy because I would see it happen and then it wouldn't happen, is when the force field around the ship is taken out, when the Palomino crashes into it, and the asteroids and stellar matter start bombarding the ship, where's all the explosive decompression? I mean, you've got this giant ass meteor that comes rolling down the middle of this ship. Why isn't everybody sucked out into space right away?
and they do it in the garden, but they don't do it.
Exactly. They do it in the garden, and they do it when they get to the probe ship. Like, I guess you can say there's still some zero G there because it's not immediately sucked into the black hole. But yeah, they lose regulation. They start frosting over because there's the vacuum of space. The robots are getting sucked out. Everything's getting sucked out. And I'm even as a kid, I knew enough to go like, right, what? Huh? How's this work? There's a hole in the wall. Everybody's out. Everybody's dead. Everybody's in the black hole. So I don't know. It's one of those things I just had to choose. I had to choose to ignore because, even as a 10-year-old, I was like, nah, man, nah. I love this movie, but nah.
Yeah, and I think both yours and Lance's point, real quick to sum it up, I think you also have to put this movie in context of the other science fiction movies that came out around the same time.
Sure.
And some of the shots that in this movie really stand up to it, and some don't. But just to let you know, the three biggest science fiction movies that came out the same year are Alien, Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and Mad Max.
And granted, the Star Trek: The Motion Picture we saw in the theater, those are not even the finished special effects, and look at how good they are. I've got the DVD with like the totally remastered, completed special effects.
And another movie that came out that same year that had a bunch of wire work for zero G and everything in it, plus some space special effects, Moonraker.
Yeah, Moonraker. Yep.
Yeah. So
interestingly enough, also scored by John Barry.
John Barry.
Which and that score in that movie I think is excellent.
It's
I don't
awesome.
think it's So potpourri, Steve.
Yeah, I'll go and piggyback a little bit on that. I will say that even with that particular problem, this movie was actually more scientifically accurate than a lot of science fiction movies, particularly for the time.
Yeah.
You're talking about a hydroponics garden in 1979. You're talking about Einstein-Rosen bridges in 1979. All these sorts of elements that you can clearly tell that they did a certain amount of homework. More homework than you normally see in a lot of modern science fiction movies.
They did have an astronaut on board as a consultant.
Yeah, that definitely shows, and I have to say I will praise them for that. They definitely thought at least a certain amount, even if they had moments where they clearly were not thinking it through properly. But they did think out things like explosive decompression, at least somewhat. I mean, they did think about what the effects of extreme cold would be in that all these sorts of things. The idea of how could somebody overcome the immense gravitational pull of a singularity. I mean, all these sorts of elements, they did put some thought into that. I'll give them credit for that. One character that I think we've left out, and I kind of want to touch on him because I feel like this character really was given a disservice, was the lieutenant. This guy was clearly kind of meant to be the action star of the whole thing, and yet he's just not much more than the impulsive kid who is trying to basically impress everybody, and he's an okay character. I mean, I don't feel like it's just that he's kind of forgettable especially when you compare him to Vincent, or to Alex, or to old Bob, and it's just kind of unfortunate because it's like I kind of felt like they really kind of did a decent amount with him. And then I think the last thing that I would want to bring up, and I would like to get Jeff and Nem's viewpoint on this. I feel like they actually thought the tactics through more, at least on a script basis, than you see in a lot of movies, especially now, because they actually do the three-dimensional thinking.
Yeah.
With robots, like because you see, like for example, Star Trek 2. Well, what is his pattern indicates two-dimensional thinking, and they don't think about the fact that they can fly. When they actually have one of the main battle scenes towards the end of the movie, they take advantage of the fact that the robots can fly. In a movie where getting the robots to fly was tricky, I have to give them credit for that. That was actually pretty smart. It seems like the robots actually are pretty smart as well. With some of their decision making. For example, when Vincent and old Bob take out that one robot, and they realize, okay, yeah, we got to hide the robot body.
Yeah.
That we took out before they catch us. So they clearly are thinking through these things, rather than just kind of randomly going through the Cygnus and just messing stuff up. They're actually thinking about the consequence of their actions. They're thinking about what kind of plan makes sense. And I have to appreciate when they actually do that, because it doesn't happen often enough in movies.
Yeah, real quick. I mean, Jeff, do you want to hit that one, and then I can throw in something, and then
I've got to agree. That's an excellent point, Steve, because when you have an asset like that, use it, and it makes so much sense. And he even says, "We'll catch them in a crossfire."
Yeah,
knowing that these things are grounded in the greatest of Star Trek conventions, there are no railings on any catwalk anywhere. So you've got that kind of a setup. So why not? I also love the just the added little detail that things lead to things. There's sorts of consequences. Like one robot gets shot, and as he's falling as he shoots, and he blows out the front of another robot, and just some great little details like that. So for a guy who didn't do action, who'd never done action before, I will give him props for like thinking out things like that. And again, I don't know how much of it was in the script and how much was this particular director. By the way, another Easter egg: the guy whose face you see when they pull off the faceplate, that's the director. This little cameo. But yeah, that's perfectly logical, and I love seeing people who are supposed to be smart act smart in a movie. So that's always appreciated.
For me, just real quick, I thought it was kind of a mixed bag. There were things that I really liked, like for instance, Charlie coming in from behind when they're trapped, and he's doing the attack from the rear there, and great move. So that was cool. I did like old Bob and Vincent doing their flybys, and strafing. Usually you wouldn't go through the line, you go over the line. If you're calling in like an A10 or something like that to strafe a column. But I mean, that's so technical as to be beyond
Sometimes
technical.
it's really cool.
Yeah. The only thing I would add is that if it were me down there getting fired down upon, I would have old Bob and Vincent distracted them, and I would have shot the bridge out. That's what I would have done.
Yeah.
So,
Which eventually they do.
Yeah. So, but I get it. I have to say those security robots were garbage, though, man. They were They
Man,
were.
other than Star, they make stormtroopers look like crack shots.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those things were a hot mess.
And I will
Although-
also add, Vincent is a good shot.
Yeah.
It's not like you see in Star Wars where they're like constantly missing everybody. No, Vincent hits his shots.
Yeah. Although
Yeah.
those lasers that they used were cool as hell, because all my friends and I for a year after that were running around with the double things like doo 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 doo.
Yeah,
So,
Halo picked up on that.
yeah. So, cool. So I'm sure there's, like, as always, there's so much more we could talk about. But I would say that I can speak for all of us that I would highly recommend this movie. It's worth checking out to see all of the influences from the time that were on the movie, and then also the influences that this movie had on movies that came after it. And I think it's a hidden diamond in the rough. You know, there are definitely things that could be polished on it. There's things that could be better, but I think it's worth checking out to see. And if for no other reason, to see Vincent. Vincent's cool as hell. If you can find a Vincent action figure, pick it up before I do, because my mom sold all my action figures. When I
They're
went to college.
expensive.
So, with that said, once again, I am going to surprise the guys with our next movie. We were talking about John Carpenter Mars, and I want to watch that movie. I haven't seen it, but
Yes.
I do want to watch it and cover that. But I think with everything going on, I want to cover a George C. Scott movie.
Ooh.
But I was going to do Patton, but I think that is just way too much of my wheelhouse, because I'm a Patton nerd, and I don't
You
know how much.
magnificent bastard! I read your book.
Yeah, I don't know how much everybody else wanted to do Patton, but with everything going else,
I would love to do that one actually.
well, then we'll have to do Patton eventually. But
As long as it's not the film Hardcore.
no, this is a movie that I think, and I eventually would also like to do The Exorcist 3 with George C. Scott.
Yes.
So, but I think this
actually know
movie,
that film.
I have surprisingly never seen this movie. I've seen clips of it. I think it would be great for us to cover Doctor Strangelove.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome.
what do you guys think about that?
I adore that movie. So yes.
All right, Lance, you good with Doctor Strangelove?
I can talk a little bit of Kubrick sparingly.
Okay. So, yeah, we've already done some Kubrick.
Yeah.
I thought with everything going on in the world, it would be it's a topical movie that might be
It's
interesting to cover.
apropos.
Yeah. So tune
Don't talk to
in,
me about sorry. Don't talk to me about how sorry you are. I can be
Yeah.
sorry enough for both of us.
and it's got Slim Pickens in it, you know, so we can see Slim. So next week we will talk about Slim Pickens and Peter Sellers and George C. Scott and James Earl Jones.
No
and
relation.
the whole
Yeah.
bunch of people in there watching Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Love the Bomb. So until then, I'm Nemesis. Thank you for watching, and I want to thank my co-host. Thank you, Lance.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is fun.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff.
Hey, it's my pleasure. This is a great film to review. Given the level of technology, barring a couple of things we see in this film is still actually pretty timeless. It looks like something we could kind of see today. So it's well worth watching if you haven't seen it before.
Awesome. And thank you so much, Steve.
Well, thank you for introducing me to this movie. I came away really enjoying it. So yeah, I hope you guys do see this one. It is pretty solid.
Excellent. So on behalf of all of us here at Cinema Crusaders, enjoy movies. Please check out this movie. If you have any suggestions on movies you'd like us to cover, feel free to DM us at Cinema Crusaders, or to send us a DM to our personal DMs. We're all on Twitter. So until then, enjoy the movies, and we'll see you next week on Cinema Crusaders as we cover Doctor Strangelove. We're out of here, everybody.
See ya.